Hi everyone. In today's podcast, we will talk about the case of Maria de la Candelaria, who accuses Michaela de Molina of casting spells. This was a trial that was conducted by the Holy Office of the Inquisition in Guatemala in 1696. And the story and some of the documents related to the case were published by Professor Martha Few in her book about colonial lives, and we will in fact quote from the inquisitorial documents, and we will tell the story of Maria to understand how the Inquisition used to process the, let's say, heretics at that time. We have to mention that we are talking about here of the Spanish Inquisition. We have also the Portuguese Inquisition, but we are dealing now with Spanish colonies in the Americas. We have to say that the Inquisition was established in Seville, Spain in 1478, and later on it was established in the New World. We have that the Tribunal of the Inquisition in New Spain, what is today Mexico and the neighboring countries, was established in Mexico City in 1571. In 1570 it was established in Peru, and the 1600 was established in Cartagena in Colombia. And now we have this tribunal in Guatemala that in fact all the cases were then taken to the seat at Mexico City. We have to understand also that this was a time when the Spanish conquistadors and the Spanish monarchy was trying to enforce their culture, their religion on the people, the Native Americans, the Indians from these regions. And we have that it was a period of the formation of the Guatemalan and also the American identity in Southern and Central America and the Spanish colonies. We have that the population was becoming more mixed. We have marriages between Spaniards and Indians, Spaniards and Africans, Africans and Indians, and vice versa. So we have that what was called, of course, you have the Spaniards, people from Spain. Then you have the Indians, the majority of the population. Then you have Africans, either slaves or free. And then you have what was called castas or mestizos, which in this category you include, like I said, all kind of mixed people in this broader term called castas. So also we have to emphasize that the official religion, of course, of the Spanish monarchy was Catholicism, and the Christianity was trying to be enforced on the population, on the local population. So this was a time of evangelization, and you have that the Native Americans, the Indians, were not under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition because they thought that they had not enough knowledge. They were still in the process of being converted or becoming knowledgeable of Christianity, therefore could not be held accountable because of their let's say sins or heresies against the doctrine of the church. But you have in these countries what was called as syncretism, which is a mixture of Christianity, Native Americans beliefs in spirits, healing, shamans, and all of these, and then you have mixture with African religions, and so all of these could be found in the different Spanish colonies in America. So within this context, let's now look at the case of Maria de la Candelaria and how she accuses Michaela, a mulata, of having casting spells on her. And this gives us also an understanding of the mentality at the time, the mentality of the people in Guatemala in the 17th century, and beliefs, superstitions, and how the church and the Inquisition, and as an instrument used by the church to regulate or implement the Catholic orthodoxy, used to look at these things. And why was important that the Inquisition follow and pursue this case? And in fact, someone got judged and sentenced by the Inquisition. So let's look at the details. As I mentioned before, the Inquisition was established in Guatemala in 1572 with the appointment of its first commissioner, Don Diego de Carvajal. The Inquisition cases were investigated, were prosecuted by the Guatemalan ecclesiastical authorities, and then we know that all of this fell under the control of the Tribunal of the Inquisition in Mexico City. The commissioners of the Guatemalan Inquisition, tells us Professor Martha Few, heard complaints of religious deviance, including witchcraft and sorcery, pacts with the devil, blasphemy, concubinage, solicitations in the confessional, and the possession of prohibited books. The Inquisition's mandate to enforce religious orthodoxy included all peoples in New Spain, with the important exception of the colonist majority, as I mentioned before, the indigenous population, who had been formally removed from its jurisdiction by order of King Philip II in 1571. But while the Holy Office could not prosecute Indians for religious crimes, it still regularly called them to appear in inquisitorial proceedings as witnesses. Professor Few continues and says the following: the documents that we will take a look and examine is the case of sorcery prosecuted against Michaela de Molina, a mulata. A mulata is a mixed descendant of a Spaniard and an African person, and this term mulata is the one given to their children. Michaela de Molina, a mulata resident of Santiago de Guatemala in 1696. The Guatemalan commissioner Don Joseph de Baños y Sotomayor had heard rumors that Michaela de Molina, a candy seller, had cast a spell on Maria de la Candelaria, an Indian servant, causing her to become extremely ill and expel and vomit numerous items from her body. Baños y Sotomayor decided to investigate the case and interview Maria de la Candelaria on her deathbed, because she was too ill to leave her home. He also questioned two other witnesses, Maria's mistress, Doña Juana González, and Doña Juana's teenage niece, Doña Rafaela González. All three described Maria's illness in detail, including her symptoms of nausea, fainting spells, and body swellings, and the expulsion of various items through her nose and mouth, such as blood, rocks, and pieces of charcoal. All of this they attributed to Maria's illness, to a series of arguments she had had with Michaela de Molina, someone else called of surname Garcia, and Teresa. We will mention in more detail who are these people and why they were involved in this case. After assessing the evidence, the Inquisition authorities convicted Michaela de Molina of sorcery in July 1696, seizing her home and goods, and imprisoning her in the public jail until May of the following year. The witnesses in this case resided in the city of Santiago de Guatemala, a major urban center and the political and religious capital of the Audiencia of Guatemala. In the late 17th century, Santiago de Guatemala had a population of about 40,000 inhabitants. In this multi-ethnic city, roughly 15% of the inhabitants were identified as Spanish, 20% as tributary Indians, and the remaining 65% as gente ordinaria. This is a term that included, as I said, Africans, both free and enslaved, and castas, mixed race groups. We have to think about what was included in this case, because in this in the documents that we got from the Inquisition and what was written by Commissioner Baños y Sotomayor, and the three testimonies of Maria, Doña Juana, and Doña Rafaela, While the commissioner deemed Maria's supernatural illness as serious enough to investigate, none of the religious and political officials who reportedly witnessed Maria's strange expulsions, including 3 priests and the town council member and judge, and not a royal notary and a constable, came forward to denounce the incidents, nor were they called to testify. So when we analyze these kind of documents for the investigators, we have to really consider different questions on this. And Dr. Few, in her book, mentions, or in fact questions these documents as follows. Why was Maria's illness seen as so important for the Inquisition to investigate? Yeah, because if this is just simply superstition, why the Inquisition was after superstition, after someone claiming that, I'm under the cast of a spell from someone else? Could the illness have been related to the pregnancy or childbirth? Because we know that Maria de la Candelaria was in fact pregnant and she gave birth. Perhaps after this she became ill and then she was attributing it to sorcery, spells. How do you explain the sworn testimony about its supernatural causes and highly unusual effects? What was the significance of Maria's illness and the items that she expelled for people in the late 17th century Guatemala? Were they seen as simply supernatural things, the work of the devil, sorcery, or simply unexplicable things, like there was no explanation for this? Let's look at the document itself and see what they tell us about this case. First of all, the commissioner, Dr. Joseph Baños y Sotomayor, orders an investigation into the acts of sorcery, and he goes and interviews Maria de la Candelaria, the person involved and the one that got ill. So the document reads as follows. In the city of Santiago de Guatemala, on July 1st, 1696, in the afternoon, a woman named Maria de la Candelaria was called to appear before Dr. Don Joseph de Baños y Sotomayor, dean of the cathedral of this city. She swore to tell the truth. She is an unmarried Indian servant of Doña Juana González, neighbor of this city. She says she is 18 years old and she's in bed. Maria de la Candelaria was asked if she knows or presumes why the Señor Commissioner of the Inquisition came to see her, and why she is called by the Holy Office. She said she presumes it is to learn from her about the things that she has expelled and vomited, which she presumes are the result of an hechizo, a spell. This evil was done to her by a mulata named Michaela de Molina, who sells candies in the streets, after she had some encounters with her over the past 2 years. The first time caused her mistress, Doña Juana González, to become annoyed, because Maria had gone to a holiday celebration in 1694 where she dragged the mulata Michaela de Molina by the hair. A few days after the fight, Maria de la Candelaria began to suffer from fainting spells, and she expelled blood from her mouth and nose. And even though Maria and Michaela later became friends again, they fought a second time over some issues. While this witness walked by the mulata Michaela's door after midnight, Michaela provoked Maria so that in this case, the text says that who had made a neighbor pregnant. So Maria was pregnant. And the noise of their voices caused her mistress, Doña Juana González, to leave her house to confront the mulata. This fight occurred at the end of the last of October 1695. So we have here an issue between two women fighting. an Indian woman who was the servant of Doña Juana González, a Spaniard, and a mulata, Micaela. And these two women had two fights. One, and both seemed to be publicly, and there was an issue. Maria was pregnant, and as we will see furthermore, it seems to be that this was simply an issue between women fighting, and it seems to be because of a man. It seems, and we will see this later on, Maria was having an affair with an Indian man, and she got pregnant. And then it seems that they start fighting because of this man, and later on they start accusing each other, saying that, oh, Maria was sick, it was because of sorcery, it was because of a spell, it was because of this. So they were creating issues, trouble to one another. And it seems clearly that perhaps Maria, after gave birth, she was kind of sick, and she couldn't really understand what was happening with her. And then she claimed that, oh, it was a spell. This is sorcery. This is evil. This is witchcraft. And at that time, I have to emphasize, this was something very common, and people usually attributed all kind of illnesses and diseases to the devil, to the demon, and it was not unusual to find this kind of documents with such information and fights between women. The document follows. A few days later, Maria de la Candelaria gave birth and immediately began to suffer constrictions in her chest, which caused so much anguish that she appeared to be in the throes of death, and she was deprived of her senses, her belly and heart swollen. She suffered from this for 3 months, and neither doctors nor midwives understood the illness. Two Indian women, with whom Micaela has a very close relationship, helped the mulata Micaela do evil to Maria. One of the Indian women lives in Michaela de Molina's house, and the other visits almost every day. Her name is Teresa, and she is from the nearby town of San Cristobal el Bajo. Teresa is known to be a sorcerer, and Maria has heard it said that the Indian Teresa killed a mulata woman with hechizos, spells, and was imprisoned in the public jail of this city. Maria presumes that the Indian woman who lives in Micaela's house is from the town of Amatlitlan and is named Jerónima Garcia, also helped Micaela. This witness said that she had a fight with Jerónima because she carried on with a married Indian man whose wife is also a servant with Maria in the house of Doña Juana González. The Indian Jerónima later fled after the judicial officials arrested the mulata Michaela de Molina and the Indian Teresa on the suspicion that they had done evil to the witness. Maria de la Candelaria was asked with what maleficios, with what spells or effects Micaela, Teresa, and Jerónima had experimented. She said that 15 days ago, her mistress had sent her on an errand. She began to feel faint, and then suddenly she expelled blood from her mouth and nostrils. She was brought back to her house, discharging blood. First she expelled through her mouth a lump of rags tied with a string. Then she expelled through her mouth 2 jícaras, cups of coal, in the presence of her mistress Doña Juana González and Father Matías Lobo de Utilla, a secular priest. Later, in the presence of the priest of Nuestra Señora de los Remedios, Don Francisco de Pontaza, the secular priest Don Juan de Moncada, and her mistress, she expelled from her mouth another large lump of blue rags, inside of which was a large lock of hair, and then immediately 3 times she vomited from her mouth a huge amount of zacate, hay, and a small ball of soap. And from the Sunday of the feast of Corpus Christi, almost continuously until the following Thursday. She expelled blood and many locks of hair through her nostrils. And finally, at the same time that a stone hit the window of the house of this witness, she expelled from her mouth many pieces of stone of the same type that had been thrown at the window, some large and others small. And on that occasion the alcalde ordinario of this city, the mayor of the city, Captain Don Diego de Quiroga, was in her room, as was a royal notary. Maria was asked if she had any more suspicions that the mulata Micaela had done evil to her. Maria said yes, because after she began to feel the effects of the maleficio, which she attributed to her enemy Micaela, then Micaela went to the house of Doña Nicolasa González, the sister of her mistress, to apologize. Micaela said that she hadn't done the maleficio, but that the Indian woman, Teresa, from the town of San Cristobal el Bajo, had done it. Teresa was angry with Maria for having had an illicit relationship with her son-in-law, Pablo Vallejo, a neighbor of the town of Santa Isabel, located close to the city. This witness says that it is true that she had an illicit relationship with Pablo Vallejo, the son-in-law of the Indian Teresa, but it happened after the 3 months that she was in bed so ill after having given birth. Maria said that the mulata Micaela had also apologized to an Indian named Tomasa, and said that the Indian Jeronima Garcia caused the Indian Tomasa to get the divorce, and she turned into a bird, and that Juana de Monasterios told her this. And Maria presumes that Micaela, together with the 2 Indian women, had done the evil to her that caused her to suffer. All 3 wished her evil. She was not on good terms with them, and on one occasion in the countryside, Micaela had wanted her to take off her clothes. Maria told a tall man about this, someone she didn't recognize, as it was nearly night time. And this is the truth by oath made after having been read. Maria de la Candelaria said that it is well written, and that she did not give her testimony out of hate, but only to discharge her conscience. She promised to keep the testimony secret, and not knowing how to write, she did not sign the document, and the commissioner signed for her. So, from this testimony, from the evidence that we gather right now, as historians, we cannot really believe everything that we just read from the text. When we look at ancient documents, we have to question the document, we have to look at the sources, we have to look at the testimonies, we have to look at the context, we have to look at the motives behind the testimony, even though it was a sworn oath, under a sworn oath or testimony, that this testimony was given. So, as we can notice from the evidence, it seems clearly that there was an issue here with a man. A married man was having an affair with Maria, and Maria now was having some problems, issues with these Indian women, of course, because this guy Pablo Vallejo was the son-in-law of one of Jeronima, that had a fight with Maria also. And Jeronima was a friend of Micaela and a friend of the other Indian, Teresa. So it's obvious that we are talking about 3 women against 1. And we have also the testimony of Doña Juana González, which is the mistress of Maria. We have also from the records the testimony of Rafaela González, which is the sister of Juana González. These are Spanish women who gave also testimony before the Inquisition. And of course, Maria, working at the house of Doña Juana, now she was sick, and Doña Juana, of course, is seeing that her servant sick. This is a loss for her, and obviously, I don't know, was she looking for remuneration, for money to get things fixed? It was common at the time to attribute all kind of illnesses and disease to witchcraft, spells, sorcery. What was the mentality of the people at the time? Why, or could we say that Maria that since she became sick, she took this as an opportunity to get revenge from her enemies and accused them before the Inquisition of casting spells on her and of becoming sick. And now she's getting the support of her mistress, a Spaniard woman, and we know that the testimony of a Spaniard woman was taken more seriously than the testimony from an Indian or a mulata or an African person. And this is the evidence from the time. In fact, we know that after all the evidence was gathered, in fact, the Inquisition authorities convicted Michaela de Molina of sorcery in 1696. They went to her house, took everything from her, and sent her to jail. And as we can see from all these documents, when we look at the records from the past and we look at the inquisitorial records, as I said, we have to be very careful with the evidence. We have to weigh all the evidence. It is true that it's kind of strange to really reconcile what document mentions about Maria vomiting all these kind of rags and stones and coal and these kind of things. Is strange, of course. This is what the witnesses said. Seems to be. She was also vomiting blood. This could be, let's say, common, normal. What was not normal that she was like vomiting rags, blue rags tied with string, and then later on, other of the witnesses also mentions that inside the rags there were like a tooth and garlic and few other things. So all of this looks like spells, witchcraft, and many other things. So from all of this, it seems to me that this was simply a quarrel, a fight between women for a man. Maria got pregnant, gave birth. Jeronima was simply fighting for, or of course, we're talking about here her son-in-law. And at the time, it was common, like it's common today, when women and people from Latin America have this kind of quarrels and fighting. Usually go to see a sorcerer, go and look into witchcraft, santeria, and all these things, so they can take revenge on their enemies, and they cast what they call spells and witchcraft and all these things on their enemies. So it was a common thing at the time. It is a common thing today. And we're not discussing if this is true or false, or if it's effective or no. We're simply looking at the document and we're trying to understand what was the context of all of this. And now the question is why the Inquisition was simply after these things. Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of our podcast, we said that the commissioners of the Guatemalan Inquisition heard complaints of religious deviance. So it is clear that although the Indians were not under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition, they were called to appear before the Inquisition as witnesses. But also they were in the process of Christianization. And at a certain extent, the Inquisition made sure that they followed the orthodoxy. They like I said, they were after witchcraft, sorcery, pacts with the devil, blasphemy, concubinage, solicitations in the confessional, the possession of prohibited books. So all these kind of things attracted the attention of the Inquisition, especially because we see here that 2 or more Spaniard women were also involved. And these ones were, of course, under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition. So it was a big case, although it's very interesting that this mulata got sentenced and to a year in jail by the Inquisition, so far as the record shows. But it's very, very interesting to understand the mentality of the people at the time, how the church, through the Inquisition, used it as a method of regulation, of control, and assuring the maintenance of Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Catholicism. So it has come the time for the ending of our podcast. I want to thank you so much for listening to me this day. We will continue with more of these topics related to the Inquisition, history, philosophy, anthropology, and many, many more topics. Thank you so much for listening. As always, don't forget to look at the material in the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me in the social media and Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next podcast.